We begin tonight with everyone's favorite part of the holidays, airports. Well, on this Thanksgiving Eve, travelers had extra cause for trepidation because of a planned national opt-out day, an attempt to overwhelm security checkpoints and embarrass the TSA. But it may be that the only thing harder than getting passengers to endure security checks is getting them to deliberately prolong security checks, which is reassuring. Ryan Owens has our report.
It turns out the day everyone is rushing home to Grandma's house is a very bad day to stage a protest.
Make sure to opt out.
At the nation's airports, travelers largely opted out of the much-hyped National Opt-Out Day.
Time-consuming pat-downs instead of passing through the body scanners.
Subjecting their citizens to panty pat-downs.
Agents actually patted down a dog because it was wearing a sweater.
Flyers ignored weeks of calls from privacy activists to refuse those revealing body scans and force TSA agents to perform invasive pat-downs that even got the attention of Saturday Night Live.
When selected for a full body scanner, say no. You'll be pulled aside by a TSA agent, and that's when the fun begins.
Activists hoped National Opt-Out Day would cause long security lines, embarrass the TSA, and all but grind air travel to a halt. Instead, a very few protesters showed up at the country's largest airports. At DFW, a grand total of 4, although they were armed with some pretty clever signs. At LAX, a few more handed out "Don't touch my junk" stickers. At Washington's Reagan Airport, activists were actually met by angry flyers, determined not to be slowed down.
Yeah, make sure to opt out when you go through the scanners. No?
So what was supposed to be a national day of protest turned into little more than a sideshow. There was the college student in Salt Lake City who went through security in a Speedo.
Sir, what are you doing?
This is a safety precaution, man.
Put your clothes back on.
I'll put them back on if it...
Put your clothes back on.
The woman in LA who asked for a pat-down in her bikini.
If they want to try and see what I've got hidden in my bikini, they're welcome to.
Still, one of the organizers of National Opt-Out Day, James Babb of WeWon'tFly.com, calls today a success.
The interest has just been incredible, and all the reports seem to indicate that airport traffic is light. If fewer people have been abused today as a result, I'm ecstatic about that.
He says even though the protests weren't large, the message got through. Take the Davis family flying from Dallas to see Grandma in El Paso. It took them all of 2 minutes to breeze through security, but they were still leery.
I'm not too big on either of the choices.
You don't like either of the choices? Well, what are you going to do?
I don't want to get killed through radiation. I don't want to have people touching my private parts.
It is the touching, the pat-down that has drawn the ire of so many Americans. A recent ABC News Washington Post poll found that nearly 2/3 of people support the body scanners, but half say those pat-downs just go too far. The uproar started a few weeks ago and has only gotten louder. First, there was the guy who famously recorded his encounter.
We could do that out here, but if you touch my junk, I'm going to have you arrested.
And then a flood of YouTube videos, including a shirtless little boy being examined by an agent. TSA insists it is all necessary to keep explosives off planes. President Obama was forced to defend the procedures.
You have to constantly refine and measure whether what we're doing is the only way to assure the American people's safety.
His Secretary of State was asked if she'd go through them.
Not if I could avoid it. No, I mean, who would?
Apparently the answer, Madam Secretary, is just about anyone who had to. Of the estimated 2 million people flying somewhere for Thanksgiving, the TSA says only a handful opted out. And a few travelers even brought signs of support.
I've never felt violated. Whatever the person needs to do, she needs to do to protect the flying public.
I understand why people are upset, but I think there's a bigger issue, and it's hard to balance your civil liberties and our safety.
I'm fine with it. I'd rather be patted down on the ground than blown up in the air.
Attitudes like that resulted in surprisingly smooth sailing. Jason Scott works for Travelocity. He spent the last few days at DFW as part of the website's so-called Turkey Task Force, constantly tweeting about any problems he sees and checking in with his colleagues at the nation's 12 busiest airports.
This is like much better than a normal day, almost.
Almost. I mean, given the short security lines that we're hearing about nationwide and the on-time departures, it's a great story.
And admittedly not the story any of us expected to be telling tonight.
What are you doing?
After weeks of worry, the travel nightmare so many feared never materialized. And the trip home this year will be memorable for all the right reasons. I'm Ryan Owens for Nightline in Dallas.